She sat quietly in the defendant's chair, the weight of her ribbons contrasting the silence that pressed down on the courtroom. Former SEAL Lieutenant Commander Nadia Rowan faced the tribunal in full-dress uniform, rank, ribbons, and everything they wished she'd left behind, carrying the calm of someone who had survived worse than judgment. The judge leaned forward, voice sharpened with disdain. "You're not exceptional, Commander. You're a disgrace. What happened next?" Silenced everyone in the room. She rose, walked to the mic, and whispered two words that made even four-star generals freeze in disbelief. "Let's check in. 1 for first-time viewer, 2 if you've seen a few, 3 if you never miss." If this story challenged what you thought about silence and power, subscribe to Veteran Biker for the military truths they tried to bury. Tomorrow we go even deeper. She sat alone beneath the sterile glow of courtroom lights, her dress blues immaculately pressed, medals gleaming like silent witnesses against the oak-paneled walls. Lieutenant Commander Nadia Rowan wasn't here to defend herself, at least not in the way this tribunal expected. No one in that chamber knew who she truly was, or more precisely, who she had been. The courtroom at Naval Station Tidewater felt colder than regulation temperatures would allow, not from the air system, but from the eyes of men and women in uniform who thought they knew honor. The judge's gaze was the worst, fixed, hollow, disdainful. Colonel Everett Drayton didn't hide his contempt, and he didn't need to. He had the gavel. "You are not exceptional, Commander," he sneered, words echoing off polished wood and steel chairs. "You are a disgrace to the service, to the uniform, to everyone who ever followed an order under fire." No one moved, not the stenographer, not the rows of officers in the gallery, not even Nadia. She sat as if carved from stone, the only motion a slow tracing of her right thumb along a faint pale scar slicing across her left palm. Her eyes didn't flinch, her back didn't bend. She absorbed his words like shrapnel, painful but powerless to pierce what was left of her. They called it a court-martial. But from the moment the charges were read, it had felt more like a public execution. Her refusal to follow a direct order during Operation Black Mist had sparked a storm. That order would have sent her team into a kill zone where classified intel suggested civilians were present. She had called for a stand-down. Her commander had overruled her. She held her ground, and now they held her career in their hands. Across the aisle, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hensley, prosecutor and proud political climber, stood with perfect posture and a smirk that belonged in a campaign ad, not a courtroom. He had spent the better part of the past day replaying drone footage, dissecting her comms logs, and questioning her mental fitness. He hadn't come for the truth. He came for blood. Negative command. Cannot comply. Request immediate stand down. He replayed her voice through the speakers again, pausing to let it linger. That, he said, pointing at the waveform on screen, was the moment she decided her personal judgment mattered more than orders, more than the chain of command, more than mission success. Nadia's counsel, Major Leona Voss, had objected a dozen times since the trial began. None was sustained. Every attempt to present context, to request access to her full service record, was met with Drayton's curt rejection. "Irrelevant," he'd barked. "We are not here to relitigate past operations, only what happened on April 18th. But that was the point. Everything about April 18th was tangled in shadows Nadia wasn't allowed to name. Missions that didn't exist. Decisions no one had ever documented. Ghosts. Ghosts like the 7 men buried under false names in 7 different cemeteries. Ghosts like the insignia that wasn't supposed to appear again. She had worn silence like a uniform ever since. As Drayton continued his lecture, something shifted, not in his words, but in his desk. A folder, just barely visible, marked eyes only, with a faint embossed emblem Nadia hadn't seen in years. Her pupils narrowed instinctively. Her breath hitched just once. There it was, a triangular brand, inked in matte grey, with the silhouette of a hawk and 2 letters inside it, CE Crimson Echo. The room faded to a whisper in her ears. She hadn't heard that call sign spoken aloud in 3 years. She hadn't seen that insignia since the day they buried the last of her team without ceremony, without flag, without even acknowledgement. That file on that desk wasn't just a memory. It was evidence. Evidence that someone had accessed a program that didn't officially exist. Evidence that someone had pulled her past into the light. Someone with authority. Her eyes lifted to Drayton's face. He didn't know she'd seen it. He kept talking, as if he still had the high ground. But for the first time since walking into that courtroom, Nadia Rowan no longer felt like the accused. She felt like a fuse, and the match had just landed. Nadia didn't sleep that night. She didn't need to. Her mind was clearer than it had been in years. The sight of that insignia, Crimson Echo, had awakened something she had spent years trying to suppress, something buried deeper than the medals on her chest or the scars on her body. Purpose. The next morning she walked into the courtroom not as the accused, but as someone who had already made a decision. The way she moved down the aisle, even before the session resumed, made people shift in their seats without knowing why. The same eyes that had judged her the day before now looked at her with curiosity, unease. Something was different. The tribunal came to order at 0900. Judge Drayton took the bench with his usual air of smug authority, glancing at the gallery where new faces had gathered. Senior officers, intelligence observers, and civilians in black suits occupied rows previously empty. Someone had made calls. Quiet ones, high up. He cleared his throat. Before we proceed with final statements, military justice allows the defendant an opportunity to address the court. He gave a tight smile. Should she choose to? Major Voss leaned over. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "The verdict is already written." "No," Nadia said, standing. "It's not." She stepped forward with a calm that unnerved everyone in the room. Even Drayton, for a half-second, hesitated before gesturing her toward the mic. "Permission to properly identify myself for the record," she said, voice low but unwavering. Drayton raised an eyebrow. "Your name and rank are already in the record, Commander." "Not all of it, sir," Nadia replied, her tone sharpening. "May I approach?" He gave a dismissive wave. Nadia stepped up to the microphone. She took a moment, letting the silence settle like fog. She adjusted her jacket, her spine straightened, her chin lifted, and then she said it. "Crimson Echo." The words dropped into the courtroom like a depth charge. At first, nothing happened. Then everything did. A colonel in the 3rd row dropped his pen. A civilian near the back stood so quickly his chair clattered against the wall. 2 admirals exchanged a look that wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Admiral Cassandra Blythe, seated in the front row in full dress uniform, went completely still. In the prosecution corner, Hensley looked up from his notes. Pale, his lips parted but no sound came out. Drayton blinked. "Excuse me?" Nadia leaned closer. "Crimson Echo, November 2017 through March 2020, Task Force 88. The words exploded in the air. Unconfirmed names. Code names not meant for daylight. The kind of operations whispered about in black-budget meetings behind triple-locked doors. Phones came out. Officers whispered urgently. Someone called for a secure line. A JAG officer rose from the gallery and left the room in haste, and at the center of it all, Nadia stood unmoving, watching Drayton. He tried to regain control. He reached for the gavel. "This courtroom will maintain order." The door to his chambers opened. A man in a civilian suit approached the bench and handed him a red-line secure phone. Drayton hesitated. "You need to take this," the man said. Not a suggestion. Drayton lifted the phone to his ear, and as he listened, his face changed. A confusion, shock, fear. It rippled across his features in real time. "This court is now in recess for 1 hour," he said quickly, voice cracking. "All personnel are to remain in the building." He stood. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't speak to the prosecutor. He walked straight out of the courtroom, the door slamming shut behind him. What followed was chaos disguised as discipline. Officers whispered in tight clusters. Security formed at the exits. Nadia walked back to her seat beside Voss, calm as ever. "What just happened?" her counsel whispered, eyes wide. "They remembered," Nadia said simply. "They remembered who I am." They had spent 2 days trying to break her, not with fists, not with weapons, but with words sharpened like scalpels, designed to peel back discipline and dignity until there was nothing left but apology and surrender. Nadia Rowan had offered them neither. From the moment the tribunal began, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hensley had taken control of the room like a stage actor who believed the script would make him a star. He paced slowly, deliberately, as if each footfall on the courtroom floor was a declaration of moral superiority. In one hand, he held a tablet. In the other, a manila folder bulging with what he called evidence, but treated more like ammunition. "Commander Rowan," he began on day 1, voice smooth, almost kind. "Let's start simple. How long have you served?" 15 years, she answered. "And how many of those years involved command authority over active operations?" 10. "Would you describe yourself as risk-averse?" "I would describe myself as risk-appropriate." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the gallery, nervous ones from officers who knew the difference. "And yet," Hensley continued, eyes never leaving hers, "Captain Rourke's field report describes your behavior during Operation Black Mist as hesitant. He states that you refused to proceed even after a direct order was issued and confirmed." "That's correct," Nadia replied. "You refused an order. I evaluated the evolving conditions and responded with an appropriate course of action." Hensley smiled, the kind of smile that accompanied knives slid into soft places, but not the ordered action. "No," she said simply. He gestured to a screen where a grainy thermal image appeared. Shifting blobs of heat signatures clustered around a remote compound. "This, members of the tribunal, is the moment in question." The command came, "Mantis Actual, you are cleared hot. Execute, execute." And this, he tapped the tablet, is her response. He played the clip. Nadia's voice filled the room, calm, controlled, resolute. "Negative command. Cannot comply. Request immediate stand down." When the clip ended, the silence was louder than the audio. Hensley turned back to her. "So again, Commander, why, at the moment of decision, did you believe your judgment superseded the strategic command structure?" Nadia's jaw remained set. "Because intel suggested civilians were present in the structure, engagement would have violated Roe and potentially the Geneva Convention." Hensley's voice dropped slightly. "You mean you thought civilians might be present? The confirmation wasn't definitive, nor was the intel that justified the original strike." "You hesitate," he said, stepping closer to the stand, "because you didn't trust the intelligence. You questioned the chain of command. Would you say this is a recurring problem for you, Commander? A pattern, perhaps?" "Objection," Major Voss had called out. "Argumentative and speculative." "Sustained," the judge had said without conviction, more out of fatigue than fairness. But Hensley wasn't finished. He pulled out a document and placed it gently on the railing of the witness box. "Captain Leland Warren of Naval Medical Command submitted this psychological evaluation of the defendant. Would you like me to read the summary, Commander?" That evaluation was conducted without notice to defense. Voss interjected again, but Hensley pressed on. It describes signs of hypervigilance, difficulty trusting leadership, and a tendency to exhibit decision paralysis in high-stakes environments. "Commander, would you say these are accurate?" "No," Nadia said flatly. "And yet," he continued, his tone dipping into something performative, "now your own CO described a pattern of independent assessment that bordered on insubordination. Is that fair? I make decisions based on mission integrity, not egos. Hensley let that linger. Then he stepped into the most dangerous territory yet. Would you say, he asked, deliberately slow, that your sensibilities as a woman influenced your hesitation? That perhaps empathy, while admirable, clouded your tactical reasoning? The courtroom tensed as if someone had pulled a pin from a grenade. Objection! Voss was on her feet, livid. That question is irrelevant, sexist, and completely out of line. I'll allow it, Judge Drayton had said, to the shock of half the gallery. Nadia didn't blink. My sensibilities, she said calmly, have kept teams alive through 3 wars. My gender has never been relevant to my effectiveness. And it wasn't that night. Hensley took another step. And yet you froze. She met his eyes with something colder than defiance. I didn't freeze. I led. That's the difference. Hensley circled the courtroom like a wolf with too much confidence in the fence. Commander, he said, voice cooler now, eyes narrowed as he stalked toward the bench. You claim you acted on intelligence, but the team leader before you, Captain Rourke, executed his mission without hesitation, as did every adjacent unit. Are you suggesting you saw something the rest of your command structure didn't? I'm suggesting I listened, Nadia replied. Listened to a junior intel officer who had flagged anomalies in the briefing packet, anomalies that didn't make it into the official orders. You mean a guess, Hensley snapped. No, I mean a warning. Moderate confidence, unverified civilian movement in the northeast quadrant. If you'd like, I can pull the comms transcript from Lieutenant Strathmore's submission to CENTCOM. That won't be necessary. Hensley cut her off, tone clipped. This tribunal is already overwhelmed with detail. Nadia leaned forward slightly in her seat. The problem, Colonel, isn't too much detail. It's how much detail you're trying not to look at. Hensley's jaw flexed, but he recovered fast. Let's move to precedent. Have you ever refused an order before? No. Have you ever been reprimanded for insubordination? No. He paused. Then, with calculated precision, he asked, have you ever encountered a situation like Black Mist in your prior operations? There it was. The door, slightly ajar. Nadia took it. Yes, she said. Operation Silverfish, Northern Mali, 2019. My team was deployed under similar intel conditions. I raised red flags. We were overruled. And what was the outcome? Hensley asked, sensing momentum. We lost 7 operators. The courtroom went still. But before she could continue, Judge Drayton's voice cut through the air like a whip. Commander Rowan, that operation is not relevant to these proceedings. With all due respect, Your Honor. The court has ruled, Drayton said sharply. Operation Silverfish is outside the scope of this tribunal. Nadia's fingers curled against the wooden armrest. Move on, Colonel, Drayton commanded. But Hensley wasn't done. He flipped open the psychological evaluation again. If not decision paralysis, he said, with a smirk returning to his lips, how would you categorize your behavior during Black Mist? Nadia didn't even blink. Moral clarity. Hensley lifted his chin. Excuse me? She stood her ground. Moral clarity. When the line between action and atrocity blurs, you don't keep walking. You stop, even if you're the only one who does. So your personal ethics now override the strategic objectives of the Navy? My ethics, she said, are built on every mission I've survived. Every mistake others didn't come back from. There are lines that should not be crossed, regardless of who gives the order. Drayton stared down at her, eyes filled with contempt. This court has seen nothing to suggest you are anything but an outlier. You are not exceptional, Commander. You are, in fact, exceptionally weak, a liability to the brave men and women who serve alongside you. Nadia didn't flinch. Behind her, someone shifted in the gallery. A Pentagon official she hadn't noticed before leaned into a secure phone, eyes fixed on her with sudden, unblinking intensity. And that's when she saw it. On the judge's desk, tucked beneath a file folder, was the symbol, 3 edges, 2 letters, CE, a ghost she had buried 3 years ago. And for the first time since the court-martial began, she felt something crack beneath the weight of it all. Not fear, not despair, clarity. As the judge pounded the gavel to adjourn for the day, she locked eyes with him. Tomorrow, she thought, the court wouldn't be asking the questions. She would. That night, she didn't go home. Nadia Rowan sat in a secured room inside the officers' wing of Tidewater, the lights off, uniform still on, back straight despite the exhaustion dragging behind her eyes. The courtroom had adjourned hours ago, but in her mind it never stopped. She replayed every word, every inflection, every subtle shift in expression on the faces of the people who thought they knew who she was, and the face of the one man who had always known but pretended he didn't, Colonel Everett Drayton. She thought about the symbol, Crimson Echo. It had been burned out of every system, every record, every operational file. The unit was disavowed after the mission that destroyed them, buried in layers of plausible deniability and compartmentalized oversight. And yet, somehow, that symbol, hers, was on the desk of the man calling her a disgrace. She opened her personal dossier. Not the official one, the real one. The one only a handful of people had ever seen. There were no photos, just code names, call signs, dates and timestamps. Every one of her men had been listed as Kia in separate incidents. One fell during a training exercise. Another was lost at sea. 2 others disappeared in a helicopter crash that officially never lifted off. They'd made sure none of the deaths aligned, nothing that would raise questions. But Nadia remembered every detail. Petty Officer Sam Dorsey bled out in her arms after their fallback point was compromised. He never knew they'd been sent in under false intel. He died thinking he'd failed the mission. Chief Braden Knorr tried to re-establish SATCOMs manually after their drone link was jammed. They found what was left of him near the blast radius. Sergeant Ellis didn't even scream when the ambush hit. Just looked over, eyes steady as if saying, "Told you it smelled wrong," before the hillside exploded. Only she came back, badly wounded, dragged out through an extraction corridor no one even knew existed, except for one man who approved the mission parameters, then Captain Everett Drayton, acting legal liaison to the Oversight Board on Covert Deployments. She had read the classified memos. He signed off on Operation Silverfish. He reviewed the flagged intel and pushed it through anyway, and now, 3 years later, he was calling her a disgrace for refusing a similar order built on the same kind of intelligence. She stared at the manila envelope lying on the desk. Inside was the last letter she had written to the Navy, the one she never sent. The letter of resignation after returning from Silverfish, before they pulled her back in and gave her a new identity, a new post, a new silence. She opened it now, reading it aloud under her breath. "I failed them. I trusted the mission. I trusted the system, and they died. If silence is the cost of survival, I'll pay it, but I won't forget." She folded it slowly, neatly, then tore it in half, then again, and again, until it was confetti. Because tomorrow she wasn't going to be silent anymore. She pulled a smaller folder from her bag. This one wasn't government issued, it was hers, handwritten, cross-referenced. Notations about intel leaks, compromised exfil corridors, weapon caches that shouldn't have existed, the dots she'd never been allowed to connect officially. But she had connected them anyway. She placed her finger on the one name that appeared too often across too many redacted documents. Drayton. He had been everywhere he shouldn't have been, attached to operations outside his jurisdiction. approving actions above his clearance, and conveniently promoted after every disaster. It wasn't incompetence. It was insulation, a man who built careers out of the blood of others and erased every thread that could tie back to him, except one. Her. She closed the folder and stood walking to the mirror. Her reflection stared back, stern, scarred but unbroken. She straightened her collar, adjusted her ribbons, and took a slow, measured breath. Tomorrow she wouldn't be on trial. Tomorrow she would be the reckoning. Dawn broke over Naval Station Tidewater with a clarity that felt staged. The sky was cloudless, the air too still, as if even the wind was waiting. By 0800, the hallway outside courtroom 3 buzzed with attention no one dared name. Senior officers who hadn't attended previous sessions now lined the corridor, their voices low, their uniforms impeccable. Black-suited civilians flashed badges to guards who didn't ask questions. Conversations cut short the moment Nadia and Major Voss approached, replaced by nods and sideways glances. Nadia noticed everything: the increase in security, the silent arrival of 2 vehicles from the Office of Naval Intelligence, the presence of Admiral Cassandra Blythe standing beside a younger officer in a tailored grey suit with the bearing of someone who answered only to the Secretary of Defense. "What is this?" Voss whispered, watching the gallery fill with top brass and unfamiliar faces. "I feel like I stepped into a different courtroom." "You did," Nadia said calmly. She wore her dress blues like armor, not a wrinkle in sight. Her medals caught the early light through the courtroom windows, tiny flares of color in a chamber otherwise built for shadows. At 0855, they took their seats. At 0900, Colonel Drayton entered from his private chamber, face unreadable, but Nadia saw it. The stiffness in his posture, the glance toward the front row where Admiral Blythe sat, expression perfectly neutral. He didn't expect this audience. He didn't control it. "This court-martial is now in session," Drayton announced. His voice clipped. "Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, the court is prepared to render judgment in the matter of the United States. Navy versus Lieutenant Commander Nadia Rowan on charges of insubordination, dereliction of duty, and conduct unbecoming an officer." He shuffled the papers before him with forced calm. "Before the verdict is read," he continued, "the defendant is afforded the opportunity to address the court. Commander Rowan, do you wish to speak?" Voss placed a gentle hand on Nadia's arm, a silent reminder that she didn't have to, that everything she might say could be used against her. But Nadia was already rising. She moved slowly, deliberately, the heels of her shoes striking the hardwood floor like a metronome counting down to detonation. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't need to. She looked only at Drayton. "I request permission to identify myself properly for the record," she said. "You're already identified by name and rank, Commander," Drayton replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "Not all of it," she said. "May I approach?" He hesitated. The room held its breath. "Proceed," he said. Nadia stepped to the microphone. She didn't speak right away. Let silence stretch until it became the language of power. Then, just above a whisper, she said 2 words: "Crimson Echo." The effect was instantaneous. A colonel in the 3rd row dropped his pen. The clatter echoed through the chamber. The young officer in the grey suit stood so quickly her chair tipped backward. Admiral Blythe's hands froze on her lap, eyes widening by degrees. Even Voss inhaled sharply, though she didn't yet understand why. Drayton's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Nadia leaned forward. "Crimson Echo, November 2017 to March 2020. Task Force 88. Authorization Alpha 6. A shockwave of whispers tore through the room. Phones came out. Secure calls were placed mid-session. 2 aides from Naval Intelligence exited immediately. A JAG officer stood to leave, then hesitated as if unsure which allegiance still held weight. Drayton gripped the bench. "Commander Rowan, you are dangerously close to contempt." But his voice cracked. Everyone heard it. Nadia turned her gaze to the gallery. "I am not the one in contempt, sir." The doors opened behind the bench. A man in a dark suit, one of the grey suits, walked briskly to Drayton's side and handed him a secure red-line phone. Drayton took it without a word, listened, and as he did, the colour drained from his face. "This court will recess for 1 hour," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "All personnel are to remain in the building." He stood and left the bench without ceremony, the gavel forgotten. The courtroom didn't move, not yet, because for the first time since the tribunal began, the power had shifted. The room didn't look at Drayton anymore. They looked at Nadia, and she didn't flinch. The courtroom didn't resume after 1 hour. It returned with new authority. When the doors opened again, Colonel Drayton was nowhere to be seen. His nameplate had been removed from the bench. In his place stood Admiral Cassandra Blythe, flanked by 2 officers from Naval Intelligence and a civilian legal advisor whose badge was visible for precisely 3 seconds, long enough for anyone paying attention to know she didn't report to the Navy. Admiral Blythe didn't need a gavel. She walked to the center of the room with the kind of command presence that silenced a room without effort. Every uniform in the gallery rose before she even spoke. "This tribunal is now in session," she said, her voice sharp but steady. "Effective immediately, by direct order of the Joint Chiefs, the court-martial of Lieutenant Commander Nadia Rowan is hereby suspended pending formal dissolution." A stunned silence followed. One officer in the second row blinked hard, as if trying to process whether he heard correctly. "Let me be clear," Blythe continued. "This proceeding no longer exists in any official record." She turned toward the gallery. "All attendees not holding top-tier clearance are dismissed." The room stirred but didn't resist. Those who weren't cleared already knew better than to ask questions. They left in silence. Only a few remained. Nadia sat motionless, eyes forward. She didn't speak, didn't smile. But Voss beside her gripped her notes like she'd just been told her client was a ghost, one returning from the dead. Blythe stepped down from the bench and approached the defense table directly. From a leather-bound portfolio she withdrew something small and metallic, a standard-issue Navy sidearm. Ceremonially, with both hands, she placed it on the table in front of Nadia. "Commander Rowan," Blythe said, her voice lower now, almost personal, "on behalf of the United States Navy, I extend our formal apology." Voss's mouth parted slightly. "Your service record has been amended," Blythe continued, "to reflect the classified actions undertaken during Operation Black Mist as consistent with the highest traditions of naval integrity and judgment." For a moment, there was no sound except the air in the room. Then Blythe turned to the remaining officers and spoke with careful, deliberate control. "For those who remain, it is now acknowledged, though not publicly confirmed, that Commander Rowan served as team lead of Task Force Crimson Echo from 2017 to 2020 under direct Pentagon authority." Someone in the back exhaled hard. During the compromised Operation Silverfish, Commander Rowan identified intelligence inconsistencies and submitted 3 formal objections during planning. All were overruled. Nadia didn't blink. Her team was deployed with inadequate support, no valid exfiltration contingency, and a killbox compromised before insertion. 7 operators were killed. Commander Rowan survived. Blythe now looked directly at her. "You completed partial mission parameters despite catastrophic losses, and you returned with evidence of internal intelligence compromise. That report was buried." A muscle in Nadia's jaw tightened. "Until this week," Blythe said, "when your decision to invoke Crimson Echo in open court triggered the reopening of those buried investigations." Nadia finally spoke. "Where's Drayton?" Blythe didn't blink. removed. His resignation was requested and received before this hearing resumed. Internal inquiry is pending, led by Naval Intelligence. Nadia nodded once. Is it being made public? No, Blythe said, then softened slightly. But the right people will know. His influence is over. Voss leaned forward. What happens now? Blythe turned back to her portfolio and removed a second envelope, thicker. She placed it beside the sidearm. We're offering Commander Rowan 3 options. She'll receive them in writing. But for the benefit of this room, option 1, honorable discharge with full pension and sealed commendation. No further service expected. Nadia didn't move. Option 2, transfer to Naval Special Warfare Development Group as an instructor, focusing on strategic decision-making and field ethics. Still, no reaction. And the third? Nadia asked. Blythe raised an eyebrow. Reactivation under direct oversight, she said. Pentagon authority, no committees, no deniability. And the mission? Nadia asked. To make sure what happened to Crimson Echo, Blythe said, never happens again. They met in the Admiral's office, a quiet room overlooking the harbour, far from the sterile theatre of the courtroom. Morning sunlight bled across the water, bouncing off the white hulls of patrol boats cutting through glass-smooth waves, but inside the air felt still, pressurized. Nadia Rowan stood in front of the window, her hands clasped behind her back. She wore civilian clothes now, simple, precise. The change hadn't made her any less military. Her posture said everything. Behind her, Admiral Cassandra Blythe poured 2 cups of black coffee. No sugar, no ceremony. She handed one to Nadia without a word and leaned against the desk. I read your after-action report from Silverfish, Blythe said. The real one. Nadia didn't look at her. Most people never do. Blythe sipped once, then set her cup down. That operation was compromised from the inside. The intel didn't fail us. It was redirected. Deliberately. That's not speculation. We've confirmed it. Nadia turned, her expression unreadable. You're saying someone inside our own chain fed false targets? I'm saying, Blythe said carefully, that someone within a joint intelligence tasking group altered targeting data before the mission went up for final authorization. Your objections were suppressed before they ever reached oversight. And Drayton signed the mission anyway. As legal liaison, he approved it with expedited clearance, claimed everything was in line. But we've now found records of a meeting he attended, off the books, with 2 civilian contractors 3 days before Silverfish launched. Nadia's jaw flexed. Who else was in that meeting? We don't know. Yet, she folded her arms. So you're reactivating me to chase ghosts? No, Blythe said. We're reactivating you because you already caught one. Drayton's name didn't need repeating. We believe the manipulation of Silverfish wasn't isolated, Blythe continued. There are other threads, fragmented patterns in OPS across the last decade, mostly involving units that don't officially exist. We can't track them through conventional channels. But I can, Nadia said quietly. Blythe nodded, which is why I want you leading a team, a small one, vetted, trusted, your rules. There was a long silence. Then Nadia spoke. I'll do it, but under conditions. I'm listening. First, Nadia said, stepping closer, I choose the personnel, no interference, no pre-screened options. I build this team from people who understand what silence costs. Granted. Second, no chain filters. I report directly to you, no intermediaries, no one sanitizing intelligence before it reaches my desk. You'll have a dedicated encrypted link to my office, unmonitored. And finally, Nadia said, voice firmer now, I want the families of Crimson Echo fully compensated, not the ceremonial package, I mean the truth. Benefits they would have received if the mission had been acknowledged. Education, security, closure. Blythe didn't answer right away. She looked at her desk. then at the woman in front of her. "I can't give them medals, but I can give them everything else." "That's enough," Nadia said. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint creak of naval cranes outside the window. Then Blythe extended her hand. "Welcome back, Commander." Nadia shook it once, firm and final. "No," she corrected softly, "not Commander." Blythe raised an eyebrow. "What then?" Nadia stepped back toward the window, her voice quiet and sharp as steel. "Call sign will do." The cemetery at Arlington was quiet in the late afternoon, the kind of silence that wasn't absence but reverence. Nadia Rowan walked slowly between the rows of white marble headstones, each one identical in height and spacing, yet infinite in weight. She knew exactly where to go. Her boots followed a path her mind had memorized long ago, every step a ritual. She wore a charcoal grey coat, civilian cut, but even out of uniform she moved like she was still on duty. Maybe she always would. 7 headstones stood in a perfect line at the edge of a slope, overlooking a stand of oaks and the glint of the Potomac beyond. To anyone reading the engravings, these were 7 unrelated deaths, training accidents, helicopter failures, complications from wounds sustained in unnamed locations, no operational linkage, no unit affiliation, no connection. But Nadia knew better. Each one was Crimson Echo. She reached into the pocket of her coat and withdrew 7 small, smooth stones, collected that morning from the Chesapeake Bay, rounded by waves, unremarkable to anyone else. She placed the first one gently atop the leftmost headstone. Chief Braden Knorr, killed in action 2019, official cause equipment malfunction, real cause a mortar shell, triggered by false intel. The next, Lieutenant Nadir Corey, died in a fall during joint force training in Eastern Europe. The truth, sniper fire from an enemy that wasn't supposed to be there, and on it went. Marcus Donovan, Elijah Talbot, Jiro Takashi, Owen Klein. Finally, she stood before the last, Sergeant Ellis Ward. He'd looked right at her when the ambush detonated, not with blame, with understanding. She placed the 7th stone slowly, her thumb brushing the cool marble. "I remember," she whispered. "I carry you with me." The breeze shifted, rustling the trees in low, respectful tones. "I thought I might find you here." Nadia didn't turn at the voice. She knew it. Admiral Cassandra Blythe stood a few feet behind her, dressed in civilian attire, hands clasped loosely in front of her. She wasn't here as a superior officer. She was here as something closer to witness than commander. "They're listed as 7 separate incidents," Blythe said softly. "No one would know they died together. They didn't just die together," Nadia said. "They were erased together." Blythe stepped forward, eyes scanning the stones. "That's going to change." Quietly, but meaningfully. "The paperwork's already in motion." Nadia gave a small nod. "They deserve better than what they got." "They weren't the ones who failed," Blythe said. "Weren't they?" Nadia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They followed me. I brought them into that op." "You brought them back as far as anyone could have," Blythe said. "And the ones who sent you knew the odds. They made the decision with eyes wide open." "That's supposed to make it easier?" "No," Blythe said, "but it makes it traceable." And now we trace. They stood in silence for a long moment, 2 soldiers, one with scars above the skin, the other beneath. "Have you decided?" Blythe asked finally, glancing at the envelope Nadia held. "I have." Nadia turned to face her directly. "I'll take the 3rd option, but I have one more condition. I figured I want the name." Blythe raised an eyebrow. "Of the unit?" Nadia nodded. "If we're going back into the dark, we do it on our terms?" "Then name it," Blythe said. "Something no one will remember until they have to." Nadia looked back at the 7 stones, small and grey atop the unmarked truth. "Echo Vigil," she said. Blythe considered the words, then nodded once. "Because you stand watch for those who no longer can." The last of the sunlight began to slip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the marble rows. Nadia and Blythe stood in silence for several moments, the weight of unspoken promises heavy between them. "I have 3 conditions," Nadia said. Blythe gave a quiet smile, unsurprised. "I assumed you would." "First," Nadia began, her voice steady, "I select my team. No pre-screened rosters. No spooks with hidden files. I choose who I trust." Blythe nodded. "Your security clearance is reinstated to TSSCI with expanded override authority. You'll have access to all personnel profiles above Tier 2. Anyone you name will move, no questions asked. Second," Nadia continued, "I report directly to you. No chains, no middlemen. If intel reaches me, I want to know it hasn't been laundered 6 times before I see it." "You'll have a hardened channel that routes only to my desk," Blythe said, "secure enough to make the NSA nervous." Nadia raised an eyebrow. "I'd like that in writing. It's already drafted." "Third," Nadia said, pausing for half a second before the words landed, "the families of Crimson Echo. I want full benefits issued under acknowledgement of active duty combat death, not the cover stories, the truth. Educational support, survivor pensions, not just folded flags and silence." Blythe's expression turned thoughtful. For the first time she hesitated. "That one's complicated," she said carefully. "There are legacy files tied to those identities, unacknowledged deployments. Payouts would force congressional oversight. Then you're in the wrong war," Nadia replied coldly. Blythe looked at her for a long time, not in challenge but in measure. "I can't give them medals," she said, "but I can authorize full survivor benefits through alternate appropriations. Education, healthcare, housing stipends, the entire standard Gold Star package retroactively applied." "No ribbons?" Nadia asked. "No. But their kids go to college, their spouses stop worrying, and they never have to wonder why the person they buried didn't come home with a story worth telling." Nadia considered that. "Done," she said. Blythe pulled a folder from her briefcase, navy blue, unmarked. Inside was a single page, her official reinstatement. "Commander, Naval Special Warfare, Task Force 88, Operational Reactivation, call sign, Echo Vigil, effective immediately." Nadia took a pen from her coat pocket and signed at the bottom without ceremony. The moment the pen lifted, the breeze shifted, brushing leaves through the silence like the exhale of something buried too long. "You'll have a facility," Blythe said. "Quantico, off-book. Construction finished last quarter for a program that never launched. Consider it yours." Nadia nodded once. "And one more thing," Blythe added. "Your team, the people you choose, none of them will be like Crimson Echo. Not exactly. These won't be ghosts." Nadia looked back toward the headstones. "They don't have to be," she said softly. "They just have to understand what it costs to become one." Blythe didn't speak again. She simply extended her hand. Nadia shook it. A new mission was already forming, but this time she wasn't walking into it blind. This time the shadows would answer to her. Just a featureless grey building nestled behind a row of identical federal offices on the western edge of Quantico. No signage, no flag, a blank rectangle of concrete and steel that didn't invite curiosity, which was the point. At precisely 0700, Nadia Rowan stepped through the front doors with her new credentials in hand. A retinal scan, 2 silent guards in black, a coded phrase she hadn't spoken in 3 years. The elevator descended farther than any blueprint would admit, past basement levels, beyond the parking structures, then deeper. When the doors finally opened, it wasn't into a hallway. It was into a fully operational command center. Lights shimmered on high-gloss floors, holographic displays hovered above tactical tables, walls of surveillance feeds blinked silently, showing satellite grids, intercepted signals, real-time heat maps. The room felt both new and haunted, like it had been built for something the world never wanted to admit was necessary. 5 people stood waiting, They snapped to attention when she entered, not by command, but instinct. "Commander on deck," came the voice from the far left, crisp, familiar. Nadia paused. It was the young aide she'd seen in the courtroom, the one taking notes from the gallery. She wasn't in civilian clothes now. She wore tactical black, insignia stripped, hair tied back, face sharpened by discipline and expectation. Nadia gave a brief nod. At ease. The team relaxed, just barely. The young woman stepped forward. "Lieutenant Vivian Marquez," she said, "Signals Intelligence. I served with Chief Talbot before he transferred to Crimson Echo." Nadia's eyes flickered, just once. Talbot had been the last to die. "It's an honor, ma'am," Marquez added, voice quiet but resolute. Nadia didn't respond right away. She looked at the others. One by one they introduced themselves. Warrant Officer Jalen Fisk, Logistics and Exfiltration Specialist, formerly Force Recon, discharged after a disputed black site op in West Africa. Sergeant Ayla Kim, Infiltration and Asymmetric Warfare, formerly attached to JSOC. Her brother had died during a mission with Rowan's team in 2018, officially unconnected. But she knew. Dr. Theo Abrams, Civilian Systems Analyst, contracted under a classified DARPA program that was shuttered 3 months after Crimson Echo's final deployment. No military rank, but a mind wired for patterns people weren't supposed to see. And finally, Corporal Elias Reyes, Drone Operations and Recon Integration, young, sharp-eyed, recently reassigned from a program that had quietly buried half its footage behind triple encrypted walls. Nadia recognized the burn scars on his forearms. She knew where he'd gotten them. She walked the lines slowly, letting silence stretch as she met each gaze. They weren't like her old team. They didn't need to be. They were here because they understood what it meant to walk into a room and know something bigger than rank had brought them there. She stopped in the center of the room and turned toward them. "You weren't chosen to replace anyone," she said. "You're here because you've seen something broken in the system, and you chose to come anyway. No one moved. This isn't a unit," she continued. "It's a reckoning. We're not looking to fight wars. We're here to find the ones that never got reported, the ones that got rewritten, the ones that cost people like them." She nodded upward, as if the weight of Arlington still clung to her shoulders. "Everything." Lieutenant Marquez stepped forward slightly. "What's our designation, ma'am?" Nadia looked around the room. "Clean, functional, still unclaimed. Echo Vigil," she said, "because we stand watch for those who no longer can." A brief silence followed. Then each member of the team gave a single nod, silent, but unanimous. The mission hadn't started yet, but the vow had already been made. The lights dimmed as the main display screen came to life, casting a pale glow over the faces in the room. Lines of encrypted data scrolled down the left edge. A topographical map dominated the center. Heat signatures flickered in infrared along the edge of a mountain range, isolated, shifting in formation. "Briefing begins now," Lieutenant Marquez announced, stepping to the terminal. "This is a live intercept. 3 hours ago, a signal pinged from a listening station in Romania, flagged by a legacy algorithm that hadn't been triggered in over 4 years. She tapped a key, and a waveform expanded across the screen. "Pattern match?" Nadia asked. 78%. Marquez replied. With the pre-insertion comms from Silverfish, that froze the room. Sergeant Kim leaned forward. "You're saying someone just used the same encryption that got Echo burned?" Marquez nodded. "Slightly modified, but the backbone's identical. Same frequency stack. Same embedded fail-safes. Whoever transmitted this either had access to the Silverfish protocols or helped design them." Nadia's jaw clenched. "Location?" "Transmitted from a dead zone outside Kütahya province, western Turkey," Marquez said. "Former CIA staging area for cross-border ops during the Syria surge. Abandoned, officially." "Of course it is," Fisk muttered. Corporal Reyes spoke next. Thermals show a perimeter patrol. Light vehicle movement, but no ID markers, no drone defense. Almost like they're expecting no one to look twice. Anyone tried? Nadia asked. Reyes nodded. NSA flagged it as a low-risk echo. They archived it within 6 minutes. We were the only team it auto-forwarded to, thanks to the new override Blythe installed. Abrams, the systems analyst, finally spoke. The transmission isn't just familiar, it's specific. Someone embedded a 6-character flag inside the noise floor, hidden beneath the waveform peaks. He typed rapidly, then pointed to the enhancement. On screen, the characters blinked into view. Echo 06, the room went still. Nadia stared at the screen. That was Ellis Ward's fallback code, she said quietly. Kim looked over. One of your old team? Nadia nodded. He was the last man killed during Silverfish. If he was signaling for help, he would have used that. But he never got the chance. So why is it showing up now? Someone's baiting you, Fisk said. That's a hook wrapped in sentiment. Maybe, Nadia said, or maybe someone else was there, and they weren't supposed to live long enough to remember. She turned to the team. This isn't a hit-op. This isn't a drone run. We move fast, tight, eyes open. I want recon and signal taps only. No direct engagement. Not yet. She paused. And scrub everything before it leaves this room. No trail, no acknowledgements. As far as anyone outside this facility knows, Echo Vigil doesn't exist. That includes friends in uniform. Understood, Kim said. Abrams already had the satellite lock feeding live updates into Reyes's console. Marquez rerouted bandwidth from a fiber tap buried beneath a Turkish telecommunications hub. By the time most intel departments on the East Coast finished their morning coffee, Echo Vigil had a 6-hour operational window, 4 exfil contingencies, and a list of fallback protocols built on the bones of their predecessors. Nadia walked to the map. 7 glowing pings marked her last mission. Now 1 new light blinked, different but no less familiar. This time, she said, "We write the story ourselves. The mission had just begun." The approach was silent. Echo Vigil moved under night cover, dropped from a high-altitude insertion 30 clicks outside Kütahya province. The wind howled at 35,000 feet, but by the time their boots hit soil, it was only dust and breath, muffled under the weight of nothingness. No comms, no pings, no electronic signatures. They traveled light and dark. No overhead support, no drone overwatch. Reyes had configured a single narrowband passive receiver that listened without transmitting. The rest of them moved like they weren't even there. By 0200, they reached the ridgeline overlooking the coordinates where the signal had originated. What they saw wasn't what they expected. It wasn't a compound or a bunker. It wasn't even a tent. It was a house. An old 2-story farm structure, rotted at the edges, paint stripped by decades of wind. A single power line fed into the structure from a post 100 yards back. The windows were dark, but inside someone was awake. Thermal confirmed it. 2 heat signatures, Reyes whispered from his scope. Stationary, not pacing. 1 in the upstairs corner, 1 seated at ground level. Cameras? Nadia asked. Marquez tapped her wristpad. Minimal coverage, cheap civilian equipment, low-res IR on the eastern wall, motion sensor over the front door. Nothing that would detect us unless we walk straight up and knock. Nadia scanned the terrain. Exfil? Fisk answered. 35-minute fallback to the extraction point, 1 ridge south. We get hit here. It's a run uphill with no cover. Nadia nodded once. Kim, Reyes, with me. Fisk, Marquez, hold perimeter. Abrams, open the signal files. Start cross-referencing live. Find out if this place is transmitting again. They moved fast, sweeping low across the scrub, approaching from the blind side. At the base of the house they paused. A dog barked in the distance, then stopped abruptly. Nadia gave the silent signal. They breached at 0243. The door wasn't even locked. Inside, the smell hit first. Dust, mold, and the faintest trace of gun oil. The kind used in weapons that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Downstairs was empty except for a table, a radio, and a plate of half-eaten food. Nadia moved forward, eyes tracking every corner. Reyes swept right. Clear. Kim nodded toward the stairs, one heat signature still above. Nadia moved. The steps groaned slightly under her boots, not enough to wake anyone, but the second-floor door creaked open like it had been waiting. The man inside wasn't asleep. He was seated in a wooden chair, arms resting on his knees, staring at a faded photograph pinned to the far wall. He looked up as she entered. His eyes widened. "Rowan?" His voice was hoarse, not with fear, with memory. Nadia didn't lower her weapon. "Identify." "I thought you were dead," he said quietly. "They said Crimson Echo was gone." "They were," she said. "You first." He raised his hand slowly. "Name's Julian Kerr, former Operations Liaison, DIA Special Operations Division. I handled Tier 0 mission assets before they froze the budget." "Silverfish." He closed his eyes. "Yeah, I signed the support package, but I didn't write the file." Nadia stepped forward. "Then who did?" He looked up. "I don't know, but I know who let it pass without review, who told us not to ask questions." She waited. Kerr swallowed hard. "Admiral Wallace Cormier." The room went still. Behind her, Kim stiffened. "That name's not on any of the records," she said. "Exactly," Kerr replied. "That's why he's still breathing." Nadia lowered her weapon slightly. This wasn't just a trail, it was a vein, and they'd just opened it. Outside, Marquez's voice crackled over the internal channel. "Commander, we've got movement. Just picked up a low-flying drone, non-US signal. It's not here for recon." Nadia's eyes narrowed. "Then what?" Marquez paused. "It's on a kill loop." The moment Marquez's voice cut out, the night lit up. A low-frequency hum buzzed through the silence, building into a sharp mechanical whine. Nadia was already moving before anyone else reacted. "Drone strike, move!" Reyes bolted down the stairs as Nadia grabbed Kerr by the collar and hauled him to his feet. He staggered, blood rushing to his face from the sudden motion. "They're burning the site!" Kim shouted from the hallway. Outside, the dull thump of rotating blades grew louder. A streak of red light sliced across the treetops. No navigation lights, no call sign. Just speed, heat, and death. Nadia shoved Kerr ahead of her, pushing him down the stairs. "Fisk, prep exfil at fallback Charlie. We're 2 clicks out," came the response. "We'll make it 2." They broke into the night as the first payload hit the roof behind them. The explosion slammed outward, shattering wood and glass and silence. The force rolled over them in a wave of smoke and splinters. Kim shielded Kerr as he stumbled, coughing hard. "I'm hit," he gasped. Blood bloomed on his shoulder, dark and slick. "We've got him," Reyes said, pulling Kerr's other arm over his shoulder. "Go," Nadia ordered, covering the rear. Fisk's voice cracked through comms. "Flashbang intercept dropped east. If we cut the field and double-time it across the ravine, we're clear in 6. The team ran low and fast, shadows sprinting between moonlit ridges. Fire bloomed behind them, controlled, surgical, the kind of fire that erased evidence, but not fast enough. Because as Kerr bled into Reyes's shoulder, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a battered hard drive no larger than a deck of cards. He pressed it into Nadia's hand. "This has everything," he choked. "Communications, routing logs, meetings, Cormier's tail prints. They thought I deleted them." Nadia gripped it tight. "We'll make sure they never disappear again." By the time Echo Vigil reached the exfil point, Kerr was barely conscious. They lifted off in a blacked-out transport at 0324 hours. No transponder, no record, Back at base, the drive was in Marquez's hands before Kerr even hit medical. 30 minutes later, she looked up from the decryption terminal with an expression that confirmed everything Nadia feared. "This isn't just about silverfish," she said. Nadia stood behind her, silent. "There are at least 3 operations listed in here that match the same pattern. One of them happened last month. 2 names involved match internal JAG oversight panels. And Cormier?" Marquez turned the screen. A list of authorizations flashed, and at the bottom, a digital signature looped in red. ADM Wallace Cormier cleared Level Zulu 9 access channel. Vigil Alpha. Nadia stared at it. It wasn't just personal now. It was systemic. A network buried so deep only ghosts could find it. She turned to the room. "Get me everything we have on Admiral Wallace Cormier. Where he eats, where he sleeps, who he answers to when he's not pretending to answer to anyone." Her voice dropped to a steel whisper. "We're not investigating anymore." She paused. "We're hunting." The door to Admiral Blythe's office clicked shut behind her, muffling the distant hum of the base outside. Inside, the space was unchanged. Same dark wood desk, same harbor view, same air of silent command. But Nadia Rowan didn't sit this time. She stood across from Blythe, holding the decrypted file in her left hand like it weighed more than it should. "This isn't a trail anymore," she said, placing the folder on the desk. "It's a blueprint." Blythe looked down at the open page. The signature was undeniable. ADM Wallace Cormier. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. How many operations? 7. 3 confirmed, 4 partials, missing routing logs, but same encryption pattern, same chain of authorization, always just far enough off record to avoid oversight, but close enough to use Navy assets. And the timeline? Goes back almost 9 years. Blythe leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "He's insulated," she said quietly. "No direct command, no formal deployment, and his last assignment was marked advisory, which means he's got friends writing the pages around him." "He's not just insulated," Nadia said. "He's untouchable." A silence settled between them. "You want permission," Blythe said finally. "No," Nadia replied. "I want clarity. I want to know which corridors I shouldn't walk down, so I can decide whether to walk through them anyway." Blythe studied her. "I can't authorize an op against a flag officer," she said. "Not without formal review. Not even with this." Nadia didn't move. "But," Blythe continued, "I can look the other way. I can flag certain intel as not actionable and route it to nowhere. I can lose track of Echo Vigil's movement reports for a few days. That's all I need." Blythe gave a small nod. "And if it goes south?" Nadia looked out the window where the ocean rolled quietly beyond the harbor. "Then we disappear again," she said. "Same as before." Blythe stood now, slowly, her gaze steady. "You know what this is," she said. "This isn't just justice. This is a message. It has to be," Nadia replied. "If we don't make noise, they'll just find another Cormier. And when this ends, I don't know." They held that line a moment longer. Then Blythe extended her hand. Nadia didn't shake it this time. Instead, she nodded once, crisp, sharp, the same way you salute a flag before going into a fight you might not return from. Blythe understood. "You'll have 6 days," she said. "After that, someone will ask where you went." Nadia was already moving toward the door. "Then I'd better make them count." The lights in the operations center dimmed to red. It wasn't protocol, just preference. Red light preserved night vision, but in this case it set the tone. Echo Vigil didn't need ceremony. They needed clarity. Nadia Rowan stood at the head of the briefing table, one hand resting lightly on the digital console, the other holding a black folder with no markings. Her team surrounded her, silent but ready. The tension wasn't nervous, it was electric. They knew what they were walking into. "This isn't sanctioned," she said, voice low. "There will be no air support, no rescue channel, no documentation." She opened the folder. A satellite image bloomed on the screen. A lakeside villa nestled in the Italian Alps, serene and expensive, a place where whispers lived longer than men. "This is where Admiral Wallace Cormier disappears," she continued. "He's attending an off-book strategy session with 3 civilian advisors. All of them have ties to false flag contracts and shell logistics groups connected to Silverfish. Their cover? A private defense roundtable." Marquez leaned in. "And ours?" Nadia smiled without humor. "We're not using one. Abrams adjusted the satellite feed. Power grid there is independent. 2 backup generators, no surveillance connected to any national network, meaning no one will know if it goes dark," Reyes said. "Exactly," Nadia confirmed. "We don't extract Cormier. We don't interrogate. We observe, document, and transmit. The data goes straight to Admiral Blythe's secure channel. Once confirmed, we release the files through a legacy protocol tied to Echo Vigil's reactivation orders." Fisk raised an eyebrow. "That'll trigger half the military's firewall systems. That's the point," Nadia replied. "When the signal spreads, so does the truth." Sergeant Kim crossed her arms. "And what if Cormier sees us before it's done?" Nadia didn't hesitate. "Then he'll finally see who remembers." They went silent again. No applause, no nods, just understanding. This wasn't a mission for medals. It wasn't vengeance. It was the slow, cold correction of a history that had been written by cowards behind mahogany desks and wiped clean with bureaucratic ink. Nadia looked at each of them. "You've all served under false flags before, been used, silenced, forgotten, but not this time." She stepped back from the console. "This time, we carry our ghosts forward. We stand for the ones they erased, and when we're gone, what we leave behind will outlast the silence." One by one, each of them stepped forward and placed a small item at the center of the table. A coin, a dog tag, a page from a logbook, a badge. Pieces of what they used to be. Each one a symbol of what they would no longer allow. Nadia was the last. She placed a single polished stone, one from Arlington. Then she looked up. "Echo Vigil, move out!" They filed toward the exit. No battle cries, no war paint, just quiet purpose and boots striking steel in rhythm. As the blast doors sealed behind them and the lights overhead faded, a final message flashed across the operations display. "We remember. We stand. We don't ask permission." And then they were gone, into the dark, where justice lives when no one else will carry it, where ghosts don't fade, they lead. And just like that, she vanished again, not to hide, but to hunt. Echo Vigil doesn't wear medals. They don't ask permission. They don't wait for orders. They carry the names of the forgotten, and they speak the truth no one else dares to say, because sometimes justice doesn't come from a verdict. It comes from those who've already been buried, standing back up in the dark. If this story moved you, if you believe some ghosts should never stay silent, then make your voice part of theirs. Subscribe to Veteran Biker, where silence has power and revenge wears boots. Let us know in the comments. Should Echo Vigil stay in the shadows, or should they finally bring everything into the light? Thanks for watching, and don't miss the next story waiting for you on the end screen. We'll see you there.